What I'd like you to do right away is I'd like you to imagine that you're at the doctor. And I'd like you to imagine that the doctor's looking at you rather seriously down his glasses, and he says, I've got to tell you something. The results were quite bad, and it looks like you've got quite a serious heart condition. And it's a sort of heart condition that means that you're going to have to change your diet. Would you change your diet? Put your hands up if you would change your diet. Let me see. Excellent. That's the majority of you. Well, the research in this area is quite significant, and 90% of those that just put their hand up wouldn't change their diet. And that got me thinking, and it's one of these things, it's a bit discombobulating when you read something like this. The facts didn't work. And I thought, let me tell you another story. What's the story I'm going to tell you? Let me think. Right, I'll tell you, this is it's a true story. And this is a story about a business guru. You go into the workplace. This could really happen to you if you're at work. And you go along to one of these motivational lectures, and here she is. She's prepared. She looks the part. She's powerful. And she tells this story. When I was doing my research for this seminar, and there's 3,000 of you here, I did some research and I found some work at Yale University. And this was done in 1953. And this really clever professor thought, I wonder how many of my students write down goals. So he asked them, and that was fine. He recorded it. And it was 3% of them. That was fine. And of course, being a good scientist, says the guru, she did a longitudinal study, and I won't bore you with that detail just now, but she did a longitudinal study. 20 years later, the professor went back, and he thought, right, those that are still alive, interesting if you could do the other ones, those that were still alive, can you tell me how many of you put your goals down in writing? And of course, the 3% put their hands up. And then she said, amazingly, of those 3% made more money than the other 97%, all added together. Wow, what a story. If you write down your goals, you make more money. Convinced? And at that seminar, the guy next to you is just taking that diamond advice, and he's writing it down. He's got his credit card out. He's ready to buy her course on the secret of success, because she's shown this explicit link between writing down your goals and making money. Sounds good, doesn't it? That story is nonsense. It never happened. I've written to Yale. I've got the letter saying, not another one asking us about the Yale goal study. It's everywhere. I bet some of you in the room thought that was a true story. I bet you've heard it before. It's not true. But nevertheless, she's got 3,000 people in that room. She's doing it every week. She's making a fortune. And my little detector's going off, and it's telling me there's something going on. Yeah? But I got a bit confused by that, you see, because I'm a kind of, I'll tell you a bit about me in a minute, but I got a bit confused because I thought, why is it when the doctor tells somebody with the facts and the research and everything else that they're going to die, they don't do it, and yet this guru tells them something she just made up, and she's making millions of pounds. Why is it? And it's bullshit. What is it about bullshit that sells? Because it does, yeah? Right, I've got a confession to make, and it's not because I'm Scottish, right? And I'm not going to say there's been a murder, right? I'm not going to say it. I'm from the dark side. Yeah, I'm from the dark side. I spent, goodness knows how many years in HR, that's human resources. And it's funny. And then I spent 9 years as even worse, a business consultant. I'm sorry for swearing. My favourite example of human resources is this Catbert character. You ever heard of Catbert, one of the Dilbert characters? And this is the evil HR director. And he does amazing things. He switches on his random policy generator and comes up with things like, let's replace the Medicare system with Google. And if anyone goes to the toilet, they're on holiday. Yeah? That's what it's like working in HR. On the other hand, there's this business consulting thing, and spent a lot of time in that area, and we were the sorts of guys that would go into companies and we'd have a wee look at what they were doing, and we'd then go back to the chief executive with all sorts of complicated ideas, and we'd have equations that made quantum physics look like the children's BBC programme CBeebies, and then we would tell them that we had a solution to their problem. Even if they didn't have a problem, we'd tell them we had a solution to the problem, and we'd sell them solutions. And famous story, and some people in the room will know this story. Somebody came up to me once and he said, "Scott, thank you very much for your report. I'm sure the client will like it, but there's something missing." I go, "What's that?" He said, "You're missing the third factor." And I looked at him and I said, "What on earth is the third factor?" He said, "Well, your report's brilliant, Scott, but in order for the client to buy more of you, it's got to have thud." Yeah? And my report wasn't thuddy enough, so I had to go and write the thing again. Yeah? And make it thicker, make it more detailed, so we could justify our lovely fees. So that made me think about, okay, what is it about business that's a wee bit different from science, and what is it that makes people sign up to the BS that I talked about earlier? Because what we actually do in business often is have a solution, and then we go looking for a problem, and we're trying to ram them into each other, and it's not very professional, I don't think, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Now, at this point, I want to change tack slightly, and I want to tell you a little bit about me. I had a pretty awful experience about 5 years ago, and I got pneumonia. I was working for one of these consultancy companies, and it was great. I enjoyed it. I had lots of good people I was working with, traveling all around the world. But my partner and I, Samantha, sat down and we thought, is this really what we want? It's good fun, good people. However, the annual drudgery of the performance review. Guys, if you're students, you've never done a performance review, you've got something really to look forward to. Scintillating. And it just became a drudge. And we decided that we would change. And I was thinking, okay, Sam, what do I do? And she said, well, you're a scientist, think about that. So I started to think about where I came from and how I got to that point. And I have to say, I was lucky, because when I was a kid, I wanted to be a scientist, and I ended up being a scientist. And that is me, not the bony one, the fat one with the long hair. And some things haven't changed. I loved it, and I did it for 4 years, and I did groundbreaking work with fancy microscopes, and I did some brain. I did 124 full body dissections. It was fantastic. Gave me my best line, actually. I went from human remains to human resources. Some would say the transition wasn't very clear. Yeah, but it took me there, and I started to think about it, and I thought, science, business, making people change their mind, helping companies. And to be honest, then my psychology kicked in, and I remembered this thing called cognitive dissonance, and I had it in buckets, because I had all these different things, and they were affecting me, and I couldn't make my mind up where to go. And I thought, what can I do? What can I do? And one of my heroes is a fellow you might have heard of called Charles Darwin. I like to call him Charlie because he's my pal, yeah? And Charlie had written this quote. It was quoted everywhere. And he basically said that it's not the most intelligent of the species, nor the most successful of the species that survives, but it's the species that's most able to change. And here it is. Here's that quote written on the floor of a very famous institute in America. I was thinking about it, I thought, well, maybe I need to change, just like it says on the floor here in the Californian Institute. And actually, they had to change as well, because that quote was also bullshit. Charlie Darwin never said that. And I thought, oh, God. But I quite liked it. And it cost them a lot more money than it cost me. And actually, there's a quick lesson here, and actually being semi-serious for a minute. One of the things, if you go away from today with nothing else from me, check your references. Because it's something so few folk do. If you Google that quote, it's everywhere. It's in your textbooks. I'm sure you've heard your lecturers say it, and it is total BS. But it's a good message, so we'll stick with it. So I then thought, where am I going to go? And I thought, well, I'm going to go to more science, because I'm a geek, and I wanted to go back to science. So off I went. And then I had a couple of problems. And this is where things get, again, a bit more serious. There was this thing called the paywall. These are the journals that when you try and go and read the various articles and research, you go in there and it's $35 to read a document that you haven't read. So you're paying $35 for something you've never had. And it's a real problem, actually, and I think there is a real need for the academics to actually get rid of this, because it's a real problem for folk like me and others who are trying to understand their research, etc. Thank you. And if you get behind that paywall, and thanks to my lecturer friends who helped me get behind the paywalls, you find that there's something else happening, which is frankly odd. They don't write in bloody English. It's incomprehensible. You know, and they talk in such abstract English. There's lots of formulae, lots of numbers, and quite frankly, it's extremely difficult to actually get somebody to think about it in a serious way, because it's so difficult to understand. So then you think, okay, what's the impact of this? The way the scientific community and also the academic community generally are communicating is creating a barrier. But as a good academic, of course, they will always have a journal that will tell you about this, and they call it rigor versus practice. Even if I could get through the paywall for the journal, I wouldn't be able to understand what they were writing anyway. So it's a really tough area to get your head around, to try and get this information. So then I thought, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I thought, well, imagine the psychology of someone telling you that you're wrong. This is what happens. And you see these debates on the television all the time. And there's the classic one just now with the anti-vaccination movement, where people are scared of vaccinations and they've been told basically that they're idiots. And I have a problem with that. I've spent years and years and years working in change, and telling someone they're an idiot tends to not make them change their mind. They actually become more entrenched. Yeah? So we need to watch this. It's quite important, because you can't do this hammer to nut. It just doesn't work. And if you think about it, there's then a vacuum between the sort of things we do at work and what the knowledge base is out in the academic world. And that vacuum is filled by our guru and our friends. The nonsense merchants are out there, and they will fill that. And whether they're right or wrong, it's not what I'm here to talk about today, but it does cause some issues. Now I'm going to introduce you to something that I think is the beginning of a change, this current time. And one of my biological heroes, a guy called E.O. Wilson, came up with a notion in a book. He didn't come up with the idea, but he came up with the notion of it. And it's called consilience. Now, I hadn't heard the word either, but the word consilience means bringing things together from different disciplines, studying a certain factor. Doesn't matter what the factor is. And what he said was that the more things we bring together, the stronger the conclusions we're likely to get. And I thought about myself at this point, and I said earlier when Samantha and I were chatting about it, I had to change. Because normally when you talk about somebody who's talking BS, I'm not the quietest guy. You know, I'm quite an enthusiastic skeptic. But I thought, what can I learn from these people? And this was quite an important lesson for me, because it was odd. There seemed to be more comedians talking about science in the media than there are scientists. I mean, it's true. There are so few of them doing that in the media that I get quite concerned about it. I thought, what could we learn in terms of influencing these people from our friend the guru? Well, it was quite clear, hopefully you got the story. It's a good story, and I think if you describe things as a story, come on, academics and scientists, talk stories to us, we will tend to understand it better. Then if you think about the way they communicate, they hit us with these formulae. Now, this is a classic formula, but those of you who are physicists know that it's an abbreviation of a very, very complex formula. And we don't really understand it in the public. But nevertheless, the impression it creates is, we just don't know what they're saying. Very few people know what they're saying. It's always made me laugh. You know Stephen Hawking's book, The Brief History of Time? They reckon 5% of the people who bought it could understand it. I'm in the 95%. About the 5%, but we still buy it. Weird. Then there's something about appealing to the audience's emotions and their needs. This is something that the guru clearly did when she was talking about being successful. So how can we do that? Just think about it. What could we do? Then they use authority. She said Yale. If you Google it, you'll find the same story from Harvard. You'll find it from a good university like Edinburgh. And you'll see that it's everywhere. So people just use different levels of authority. Authority works, but don't use it too much, because then you can become a BS merchant yourself. Yeah, just be careful when you're dropping names. Then the thing about investment. The lady who'd stopped having her children from having a vaccination injection wasn't a bad mum. She thought she was doing the right thing. And she'd invested time in that process, thinking about it, maybe even spending money. And telling her that she was an idiot is not going to change her mind. She's just going to go back to her peers, and it's going to be enhanced. So think about that when you're having a debate with somebody. Think about it. And a classic, the tribal culture that's been developed by TED and TEDx is, I think, shatteringly successful. And I think we need more of it. There isn't enough in society. We don't do things like we were talking with other people today about. We don't go and sing together as much as we should. We don't go and talk together as much as we should. And think about the interdisciplinary stuff that we could do if we got together a bit more like we do today. It's absolutely knockout. So then I thought, okay, how do I finish this? And I thought, well, the silver bullet thing that you hear, and I'm sure you've heard, this is the solution, this is how you become successful. Never take a silver bullet on face value. Check all the facts, and this is the sort of thing the scientists will tell you. Check the facts. And it's quite exciting because, if I can find this, this is a brain up the back. It's the TEDx budget, enabling me to buy this little brain. And there's so much work being done in this area just now that we're starting to understand that feelings do genuinely change the way we behave. And even more than that, responding to feelings makes your brain actually change so that in the future you make better decisions. But that's a talk for another day, I'm afraid. So to finish, bringing all of that together, thinking about the facts that we had that didn't work, thinking about what the guru did in terms of telling stories and being impactful, I was trying to come up with a piece that would finish this. And I, 10 minutes ago, had an email. And someone said to me, Scott, I know what you're talking about, and we all know who died yesterday. Spock died, and Spock said, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. And I think that's a brilliant way to think about how we bring together the wisdom of the scientists and the academics and the passion and the love and everything else that we get from the rest of the world. And if we do that, using the brain work in the future, we're eventually going to move from pushing facts on people to helping people understand the facts. Thank you very much.